hallelujah, bum, bum, hallelujah. So that sound for me, that is the sound of the three festivals. That's common to Passover, Sukkot, and to Shavuot. And also it sneaks in on Rosh Chodesh a little bit. So with that in mind, then we have our regular weekday sound, which is just a sort of a Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lasech bivina. We have to get going to work, so we sing it rather quickly. Or Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avoteinu. Also the beginning of the Amidah is very simple on a weekday as opposed to like Shabbat, which is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avoteinu. We make a bigger deal of it because it's a nicer day and it's very special to sing it in a special way. So all of these sounds signal a time of the day, a day of the year, a season, etc., etc. So on Hoshanah Rabah, I'm just going to pull up the plan. It's the most intricate day of the year, nusach-wise, for us. Just give a moment for this to load. Any questions while we're waiting for this to load? Any questions about the music that I was just explaining? I can't see everybody, so if you want to unmute yourself with a question, feel free to. Okay, I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger. My computer will let me. Here we go. Can everybody see that okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. So as you can see, here are all the different sections of the service for Hoshanah Rabbah, and you can see that we keep flitting from one type of nusach to the other. We start, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lasech bivina lechi ben yom uben laila. We start in this very majestic sound, as if it were the morning of Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. That's how we begin the day, because we're saying this is an important day. We're sort of reminding ourselves that this is when the decree is sealed. This is when it's delivered. So we're putting ourselves in the mindset of the high holidays. And then when it gets to a more of the flow of the service, we flit just into regular weekday nusach. Then we go back to the high holidays for Barchu, then weekday, and then we flip into the festivals when we get to Hallel, which is a specific grouping of psalms for the festivals themselves. And then the Torah service, we flip back into high holidays, and we even include some texts that are high holiday specific. And I do want to make one mention, Rabbi Siegel. I had a moment when we did the Torah service on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, and I did Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, and I sort of kept it simple. And then you responded with the Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. You did the very intricate response. I was like, oh, he's ready to play. So then in the next phrase, Echad Eloheinu, I did the more intricate. So I was very impressed with that, Rabbi Siegel. So well done. So we include that, we include high holiday language in the Torah service of Hoshanah Rabbah, even though it's just a weekday. We say Kadosh v'Norah Shemo. We say holy and awesome is God's name. And then you can see we keep flitting between Shabbat and the high holidays and then eventually end up in weekday. So it's a very intricate day musically. It's a day that we Hazzanim talk about it a lot in the days leading up. Who has the plan? You know, we remind each other of the plan. We have our Sidurim marked up and ready to go. It's a very complex day. So I hope that you can join us tomorrow morning to hear all these different sounds and all of the sort of different emotions that go along with them. Any questions of that? Okay, with that, to deepen our understanding of the holiday, I turn it over to Rabbi Siegel.
Good. Thank you. And I'm glad you didn't test my nusach ability beyond the Shema. So thank you for being merciful. So because we're in a political season, in case you weren't aware, a few elections back, you might recall the tagline, "It's the economy, stupid." For Hoshanah Rabbah, it's the water, stupid, right? It's all about water. Everything is about water. And when you live in Chicago, we don't think about water shortages. When you are near Lake Michigan, right? It's something beautiful. It's something that we enjoy. And yet in Israel, this was a terrifying time. So by adding the word norah, right, to the Shema, right, norah it can either mean awesome, that we stand in awe of God, but it can also mean fearful, right, terrifying. And we're going to see how this theme is going to return in some really interesting ways. But since we're talking about water, let's get to it. So in the Mishnah of Sukkot, we are told about something that doesn't actually appear in the Torah. Nisuach Hamayim, it's called. It's the water libation ceremony, okay? So I want to point that out. It's very important because you won't understand the end of the Mishnah if we don't understand that this practice is a practice that is rabbinic, if anything, or it may have developed earlier than that. But one thing to keep in mind is that at the time of the Second Temple, there were two distinct groups in the Jewish people. I know it's hard to imagine that all Jews are not always unified and might actually have differences of opinion. Shocking. But in that period, you were dealing with the large groups were the Prushim, or the Pharisees, and they are basically the proto-rabbinic group who are very much enamored with the Torah Shebaal Peh, that is the interpretive method of Torah and the evolution of Jewish law. Whereas the Stukim, the Sadducees, were the priestly group. And if you think about it in American terms, when we talk about, some people believe that the Constitution should be read in its most pristine form without layers and layers of interpretation. They're strict constructionists. And the Sadducees, the priests, were strict constructionists. They read the Torah very, very literally, especially the book of Leviticus. And so there was some dissension in the ranks about this ceremony. And I think in a moment you're going to see why. So what happened? A golden flask holding 3 loaves, let's say that 3 gallons or 3 quarts for our purposes, was filled from the Shiloach. The Shiloach is, it's a spring in the city of David. So they would go down to this spring and they would get the water from there. And they would enter through what was called the Sharmaim, the water gate. You know, the Jerusalem has different gates. And when they would bring up this flask of water, they sounded a tekiyah, right? So they are sounding the shofar, right? A long blast, and then the truah, the staccato notes, and again a tekiyah. And now they've entered. Now, when you sound the shofar, remember that it's not just a call to us, to other humans, as Maimonides says, to wake us up, but it's also a call to God. God, pay attention. This is taking place, by the way, every morning of the holiday. The priest then went up the ascent of the altar and turned to his left where there were 2 silver bowls. Rabbi Judah said they were of plaster, but they looked silver. because their services were darkened from the wine. There was a wine ceremony, it's a water ceremony. Now listen to this. They had, in these bowls, there was a hole, like a slender snout, one being wide and the other narrow, so that they both emptied at the same time. And the one on the west, there's an altar on the west, and the one on the east for wine. If he poured the flask of water into the bowl of wine, or that of the wine in that of water, he had fulfilled his obligations. Don't worry about doing that. But so now what are they doing? They're emptying the water over the altar, over the mizbeach, over the place of sacrifice. And Rabbi Judah says with one quart, let's say, he performed the ceremony of the water libation all 8 days. So he would split it up each, for the 8 days. So the priest who performed the libation, they used to say to him, raise up your hands. Look at the Hebrew. They would say Hagba Yadecha. That should sound familiar to you. Like when you lift the Torah, Hagba, lift up your hands, right? And why, and where did this custom come from? Listen, Shapamachat, once it happened, Nisech echad al gabe raglav, that the priest dumped the water not on the mizbeach, not on the altar, he dumped it on his feet. Because this was a guy who didn't accept this custom. So what did the people do? They pelted him with etrogim. So I just thought this was an interesting story. But here, what I want you to understand is it's all about the water. And what's happening here? We are going to this specific place in the city of David, getting water, sounding the shofar, say, God, please pay attention to this, right? Wake up on high. This is important. We go to the Mizbeach, which is the nexus point between heaven and earth. This is where we offer the sacrifices to God. And we pour water through this bowl onto the Mizbeach. This water that came. And what do you think we're trying to do? We're trying to get God to send us water. Because Hoshanah Rabah is the last day before the rainy season. The rainy season, the period of rain, is going to begin on Shmini Atzeret, the next day. So we're going to offer the prayer for rain the next day. But on Hoshanah Rabbah, what we are doing is we understand that this is the period of judgment. The book is about to be sealed. And if we don't have water, if it's not going to rain, then it is going to be famine and starvation. To show you how seriously they took this idea, this is from Yoma. This is the tractate in the Talmud that deals with Yom Kippur. And they would say, and I'm just going to skip down, didn't Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi say at the conclusion of the final day of the festival of Sukkot, everyone looks at the smoke of the arrangement of wood. So they would offer sacrifice. By the way, they offered a lot of sacrifices on Sukkot, the most of the year. They actually offered 70 bullock at one point, one for each of the nations of the world. Now watch this. If the wind blew from the south and the smoke tended toward the north, the poor were glad and the homeowners, that was the wealthy class, were sad. Why? Because it was a sign that the year's rains would be plentiful, right? So you would think, so first of all, they're reading into which way the smoke blows. It almost sounds like the Vatican, the black smoke and the white smoke. They are paying attention to everything that you could possibly pay attention to as we go forward. So wouldn't you think that everybody would be happy that it was going to rain a lot this winter? Why would the wealthy class be sad? And now they explain, this is because it was a sign that the year's rain would be plentiful, producing an abundant crop on the one hand, but on the other hand, the fruit would rot due to the humidity, rendering it impossible to store an abundant harvest. This forced the landowners to sell quickly at a lower price, right? So the poor people were thrilled because they could buy fruit, right, at a reasonable price because the landowners wanted to get rid of it because they had nowhere to store it because everything was wet and they didn't want it to rot, so they wanted to sell it. But if the smoke tended toward the south, the poor were sad and the homeowners were glad. Why? Because it was an indication that the year's rain would be sparse, the yield would be low, and it would be easy to store the fruit and sell it at a high price. So look at the detail with which they're watching everything that goes on, but we're also getting some of the realia of that time of the temple period. Now, on Hoshanah Rabbah, let me just pause for a second. As you know, I'm going to turn this off for a second. Stop the share for a minute so I can see you for a minute. How are we doing? Anybody have any questions about anything I've said so far? No? Okay. Either it's such a complete lecture that I haven't allowed for any questions, or I have bored you to tears, and so you're all sort of in a stupor over there. So I'm going to assume that it's the former and not the latter. And Liz, don't tell me the truth, okay, whether it is or it isn't. So here's the thing. The temple, as we now see, was the center of Jewish life. Holidays, everything, it was all about Jewish life. And when the temple was destroyed, it would have been almost impossible for us to conceive at that time that Jewish life could actually go on without the temple, right? A minor representation of this is, how would we continue after COVID-19 when the synagogue was closed? Could we actually go forward, right? So we were innovative. Well, the rabbis were remarkably bold and innovative. And so the whole prayer service and the nusach and that Hazzan Berke was talking about developed over time. And so we would offer our sacrifices verbally. The Musaf service is filled with references to the sacrificial order if you look at it. So it's as if by speaking about it, we are offering the sacrifice. But you really have to use your imagination to do that, right? You have to really think about what was going on. You have to know something about the temple to imagine it. Hoshanah Rabbah is the closest we ever come in the course of the year to temple Judaism. It is the closest we're going to get. And it's going to revolve around the Hoshanot, which is carrying four elements of nature: the lulav that grows in arid climates, and the myrtle leaves that grow in moderate climates, and the willow leaves that grow in wet climates, and fruit, which is the etrog, and carry it around. We're going to walk around the room. Now, if you were on this Zoom conference when we began, and Liz was showing a Hoshanah service from the B'nai Jeshurun congregation. Notice that they were walking around the center lectern, right? They were walking around the bima, right, and the center lectern. What did they do in the temple? They walked around the mizbeach, right, singing Hoshanah, save us please, right? So it can't be any clearer of what's going on, but just wait, right? Hoshanah Rabbah is going to make it unmistakably clear, right? If that wasn't enough for you, right? God, if the shofar doesn't work and our revolutions don't work, we're going to take the Aravot, and we're going to take the willow leaves that just happen to grow by the water, and we're going to use them in a really, really interesting way, which brings the spiritual life that we're used to, words and imagination, to the physical realm. We are now in the physical world of the temple. And we're going to do something with those Aravot that Naomi's showing off, if you see Naomi in her screen, that we're going to do something with them tomorrow morning that, you know, it's a good thing that we have stained glass windows so no one can see inside, because I'm not sure how we would explain it to the passerby what we were actually doing with these leaves that we were beating on the floor. So back to our text. The mitzvah of the Arava. Arava are willow leaves. How is it performed? there was a place below Jerusalem called Moza, right? It's not very close to Jerusalem. It's a little, not very far. And they went down there and they gathered tall branches of Arava. It was a wet area. And they came and they stood on the sides of the altar, and their tops were bent over the altar. And then they sounded a tekiah, a long blast, a truah, staccato, and again tekiah. This is all calling out to God. And every day they went around the altar, one saying, what? Ana Adonai Hoshiana. Ana Adonai Hoshiana, which should sound familiar to us, right? We sing it as part of Hallel, but they're saying it, save us, Lord, make us prosper, Hatzlichana. And Rabbi Judah says, Ani v'ho, save us. And we're going to come back to that later, those two words, which are very odd. And on that day, they went around the altar 7 times. And when they departed, what did they say? O altar, beauty is yours. Yofi lecha mizbeach. O altar, beauty is to you. So they're actually personifying the altar. They're praising God. They're praising the altar. And Rabbi Elazar would say, to the Lord and to you, O altar, altar to the Lord, O to you, altar to the Lord. So why? So now we are now going around the Mizbeach 7 times. Okay? Why? Where do we get the idea of going around the altar 7 times? Well, it's in the book of Joshua. 7 is God's number. 7 is the number that God created the world with. And so 7 is the day of Shabbat. 7 is the number of the covenant, okay? So what happened? And you should know, by the way, that when Joshua came and Joshua brought the children of Israel into the land of Israel, they were not initially successful in their conquest until they did this, right? On the 7th, so what did they do? The 7 priests carrying 7 ram's horn preceding the ark. So they're walking around the walls of Jericho on the 7th day, march around the city 7 times with the priests blowing the horns. And when the long blast is sounded on the horn, as soon as you hear that sound of the horn, all the people will give a mighty shout. What happens? Thereupon the city will collapse and the people will advance, every man straight ahead. So in this physical universe of the temple, where holiness can be touched, we can actually reenact the story of Joshua, which was so successful. And so look what they're doing. They're marching 7 revolutions around the Mizbeach, around that altar, which is the sacrificial place where heaven and earth touch. They're surrounding it with Aravot, willow leaves that grow by the water, and they're praying. And what do they want? They want God to judge us for the good. And so the wall that would surround God's mercy, let it come tumbling down, just like the walls of Jericho. You see how serious this issue is. But you see that they're looking in the Bible for times when God saved the people. And so this is that time. In the same way that the Jewish people could not have entered the land of Canaan if they didn't have victory with God, so too they can't live on the land without water. And they see God as the source of that. And so I mentioned a minute ago that there is this phrase that Rabbi Eliezer said, that it's Rabbi Judah said, Ani v'ho, save us. Now the problem with this phraseology, Ani v'ho, please bring us salvation, is that the word v'ho doesn't actually make any sense. It's not an actual Hebrew word. So we're not exactly sure what it means and what is he talking about. And by the way, it goes into the liturgy, Ani v'ho. So we know in Hebrew that you could possibly say that it could be Ani v'ho this is a stretch, but more likely you have hey and vav, hey and vav. And and those are two of the letters of a four-letter word, God's name, Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. And so what most people believe that Rabbi Judah was actually talking about was I and God, Hoshanah. Wait a minute. I and God, please bring salvation. Now we're going to see a very huge theological leap. This is in the Megilta, that's a later midrash. Rabbi Akiva said, were it not explicitly written, it would be impossible to say, right? I'm laughing because this is so chutzpahdik that it's hard to believe that the rabbis actually were able to say. This is why Rabbi Akiva says, were it not in the Bible itself, I would never have the temerity to say this. Is what Israel is praying before the Lord, as it were, God, redeem yourself. God, redeem yourself. As if to say, God needs salvation as much as we do. And what is it? Where do you learn this? And thus do you find that wherever they were exiled, the Shekhinah, which is the divine presence, was with them. God went into exile when the children of Israel went into exile. And these are all texts that are going to prove from the rabbinic perspective that God goes into exile. And so just as the Jewish people need to be saved, so too does God. Ani v'ho. And the essence of the idea, and then I'm going to call you Jay in a second. The essence of this idea is this, that God and Israel are in a covenantal relationship, a deep covenantal relationship, which the prophets will imagine as a marriage. And without God, the Jewish people could not have entered the land. The Jewish people wouldn't be in existence today. The Jewish people could not have survived. But what this is saying is that without the Jewish people, God would not be known in the world. So by saving the Jewish people, God is saving God's self. By bringing the people back to the land, God gets to come out of exile with the Jewish people. And so, and here's a different approach to the same idea. Rabbi Yehuda ben Rav Simon said this is from the Pesachta Rav Kahana, said in the name of Rav Shimon, in the name of Rav Levi ben Prata, as long as Israel fulfills the will of the Holy One, blessed be He, they add power to His might. As it is said in the book of Psalms, on God's behalf, we will add power. And if not, and it is in accordance with Echa, the book of Lamentations, they will go without power in this context, a diminution in God's power before the pursuer. What is this ultimately saying? The Jewish people matter. They matter to God. When we do mitzvot, when we are aligned with God, God's power is greater in the world. By the same token, when we turn our back on God, God's power is diminished. And so this ani v'ho is a real theological statement about the power of this relationship and this notion that God needs to be God needs to be redeemed as much as we do. Okay, I'm going to stop the share. Jay, you wanted to ask a question?
It's in the chat. It's in the chat.
Okay, let me go see. I'm sorry.
Rabbi Siegel.
Give me one sec. If we're trying our best to reenact the temple ceremony, why don't we sound the shofar during Sukkot? That's a great question, and I think the answer to that question is that there are certain things that we don't do because we're not in the temple anymore. In other words, there is no mizbeach anymore. So sounding the shofar would be too close to assuming that the synagogue or wherever we're davening is too much like the temple. This is what we call zecher l'churban, that we don't do many things because of the destruction of the temple. So while on the one hand we can march with the Hoshanahs, we don't sound the shofar because until the temple is returned, until we return to the temple and rebuild it and stand at the mizbeach. Okay, Nikolai. Go ahead.
Can we say then that God needs us because he works through us?
Uh-huh.
Is
That's
that
exactly
a
right.
statement?
That's exactly right. That's exactly. And I just want you to think about this for a second, just to kind of, this is sort of the holy chutzpah of the rabbis, right? Here's Christianity rising up. Jews are exiled. The temple's destroyed. So this would be a time when you might expect Jews to think the worst of themselves, to feel like we are at the lowest ebb and God has turned God's back on us. And in our remarkable approach to the covenant, we empower ourselves and say that God is dependent on us. God needs salvation from us. Ani v'ho is a way of saying that. And I just find that to be remarkable. Good. Any other questions before I move on? Okay. There's more to come. In fact, there's a visual that you will not believe. Okay. So there's a wonderful website that you might want to check out. It's called thetorah.com. thetorah.com. And what I really like about it is that they have really great scholars that are, most of whom are traditional people, but they're open to scientific study of the Bible. So it's a serious website, and it's some of it's scholarly, but I would definitely recommend it. You can look at the Parsha Shavua. There are a whole variety of articles, and so I took this from an article called "The Mystical Ritual of Hoshanah Rabah Summoning God," and this is by Zev Farber. Now, just imagine. So here's what we do. We march around the room 7 times, and maybe Liz will talk a little bit more about this. We march around the room 7 times, and the liturgy is going to move from praying for God. And notice, I wanted you to take note of the fact that the first circuit is for God's sake. Now go back to this idea ani v'ho, and you see when you say it's for God's sake, what I would have normally thought is it's for us to praise God. But instead, what this is also saying is that God is in need of us to praise God for salvation as well. The second set is about the temple in Jerusalem. The third circuit is on behalf of the people of Israel. The fourth circuit is a prayer for a good harvest. The fifth circuit is nature, is our prayers for nature in general. And the final circuit is a prayer for, the sixth circuit is a prayer for the harvest. And ironically, the seventh circuit is about fire. And this, to understand why the seventh circuit is about fire, right? This poem that we actually chant goes to the opposite element, which is fire, right? Because in medieval thought, the combination of opposites, water and earth and air, created the reality that forms our existence. The theme of fire evokes martyrdom, and so the poet begins with that theme, but then moves on to other objects and people connected through fire. So it's a really, what we're chanting, it's a medieval poem, and it's a remarkable piece. And we could spend an entire semester, much longer, talking about it. Okay, so when we've done the seventh Hakafa, when we've gone through the seventh Hoshanah, we're going to take those leaves in our hands. I'm going to come back to what Zev Farber said in a minute. And we're going to say, Kol mevaser mevaser omer. Kol mevaser mevaser v'omer. The voice of the herald spreads the world, telling them. And what are we going to do? We're going to take those Aravot and we're going to hit them on the ground to try and dislodge leaves from it. And we're going to do this again and again. So we're taking, again, the Aravot that grow by the water, and we're hitting it on the ground, and we're talking about the voice of the herald spreads the world, telling of it. And so, and it comes from a verse in Isaiah. How welcome on the mount. This is a condensation of these verses from Isaiah. How welcome on the mountain are the footsteps of the herald, announcing happiness, heralding good fortune, announcing victory, telling Zion, your God is king. Hark, your watchmen raise their voices. As one they shout for joy. For every eye shall behold the Lord's return to Zion. And so this takes us, this is very similar, I would suggest to you, to Yom Kippur. That we sing Kol Nidre, and the next thing we say is, we're forgiven. That we go into this with this confidence. Right? There is a confidence. And so, Kol mevaser mevaser v'omer, this is a condensation of this, there's a word, mevaser, right? Kol. So what they're doing is they're taking this remarkable, uplifting notion about heralding good fortune, announcing victory. Your God is king. This is it. And it's all, how salvation comes on one level through water and the everyday. And then salvation writ large is all about the end of days. And so here in this, you have both ideas. What we want right now is water, but that gives us hope for the future that there will be the ultimate salvation. Now back to what Zev Farber teaches. Here I'm going to quote him. So we find ourselves in this bind on Rosh Hashanah, Hoshanah Rabah rather. On one hand, we wish to summon God so God can hear our unmediated plea for rain. That's why we say, Kol mevaser. We are summoning God, calling out to God. On the other hand, what can be more dangerous than God's presence in the room, right? So that's the whole dilemma of Norah. On the one hand, we want God to be present because God is awesome. On the other hand, we're afraid to have God present because God is terrifying. When Joshua summoned God to Jericho, the danger to Israel was averted because God's attention was focused on Jericho, which God destroys. Because we know that when God is present, bad things can happen. Just ask Nadav and Avihu, who were incinerated by God, right? Just ask Uriah, who touched the ark and died from it, right? So getting too close to God can be terrifying. So how do we deflect God's wrath in the synagogue lest we cause our own demise by calling God into our midst? This is a really powerful, I think this is really far-reaching. This, I believe, is the purpose of the willow ritual. Because we recite the Kol mevaser, the voice prayer, which represents the appearance of God in our synagogue. Why is that God? Because God spoke to us at Sinai, right? So here, if you say God's voice, then God is fully present. So what do? We pick up the willow sprigs and hold them before us. This has the appearance of a transference ritual, where the willows take the place of the congregants holding them. Since the willows have now experienced the presence of God as well, we deflect the negative consequences to ourselves by beating the willows. So what is he saying? He's saying that by beating the willows on the ground, what we're trying to do is to lose whatever sins we haven't dealt with at this moment of judgment, so that God will judge us well and that we'll receive water. What does this sound like if you use your imagination a little bit? It sounds a lot like the Azazel. The Azazel, remember that on Yom Kippur, the high priest took 2 goats. One of them was Kodesh Ladonai, was holy to God, and they sacrificed that goat on the altar. The other goat was the Azazel, and the priest symbolically placed all of the sins on that goat, and that goat was then sent to its final rewards, taking those sins with us. In a sense, what Farber is saying is the Arava represents, the Aravot, the willow leaves, represent that exact idea. And so, and here you have this nexus, back to Isaiah, between this world and the redemption, okay? I promised you a picture, which now, where is it? Oh, come on. It was here. Oh, crap. All right, I'm going to move. Give me a minute. If you can give me 1 second, I'm going to find this. Liz, I'm going to let you want to talk for a minute. And I'll
Yeah,
see
well,
what
if you
I can
want, I was trying to pull up, I have a clip from Jerusalem with them beating the willows.
Well, yeah, why don't you do that?
So I was just going to pull that up. Just give me a moment on my computer. Everybody's computers are just taking their happy old time.
There is a question in the chat room, guys.
Okay. You want to read the question while I'm looking for this?
It's more of a comment from Gerard. The striking of the willow seems reminiscent of Moses striking the rock for water.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting comment. What do you think? I mean, I'm not sure that if that's what, it seems like that's a little too close for comfort, because I'm not sure that Moses is going to, that Moses got the best result from that. But I think you're right. I think there's a lot of similarity here between that and the striking of the willow leaves. Okay, Liz, bring it up.
Everybody hear the sound okay? Chanting mine, mine, mine. So I think that gives you an idea of the spirit. I've never been to Hoshanah Rabah in the Old City before. Rabbi Siegel, have you?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Although you're watching the dancing, this is from a pre-COVID time.
Yeah.
It's kind of nice to watch in his own way.
A couple of years ago.
David and I actually went right after our wedding because my nephew's bar mitzvah was Parshat Bereshit in Tel Aviv. So we literally got off the plane and went straight to the Old City. It was Hoshanah Rabbah. And I didn't have change to buy our vote. I had like a 100 shekel bill, and they were like, it's 5 shekalim. And I'm like, I can't even buy Hoshanos because I don't have change. It's very overwhelming. Very cool though.
I can imagine.
Okay. If you don't have any other questions, I'm now going to show you the most shocking thing of all, if I haven't already, but this is something that is just, that took my breath away. This is a woodcut, and it's from a 13th century book on the holidays that was written by a rabbi in Austria, okay? And everything is normal in the book. They had a picture of a sukkah, and then there's a picture of the Araba, meaning the 4 species, the lulav and the etrog. And the thing at the very end shows the moon, right? It's up here, the moon. And here's a guy, and he's clearly holding aravot. These are willow leaves. So he's talking about Hoshanah Rabbah, but either he ran out of ink or he decided to draw this person headless. So you would be hard pressed to find anything even remotely like this anywhere else. So what's going on here, okay? So, why would a devout Jew do this? And Ramban Nachmanides offers the solution. And this rabbi is clearly a student of Nachmanides. Because this is the final day of judgment. We've Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and the whole notion, it's not just judgment for water, it's judgment for everything. And so mi yechia, mi yamut, who's going to live and who's going to die? According to Ramban Nachmanides, if you want to know your fate for the year, you should go out on Hoshanah Rabbah, which is a pretty full moon, so it should be light, right? And you should look at your shadow in the moonlight. If the shadow that is cast is that of a whole person, then you should have a pretty good feeling about the upcoming year. And you could say that you have been sealed in the book of life. However, if the shadow is headless, the devout Jew should begin getting his affairs in order. Isn't that wild? So this is the ultimate. So in a world, so I guess what I want to end is this. We live, at least most of us live, in a highly scientific age where we can explain things. We can explain why there's a drought, and we can explain why it rains, and we can explain why there's a hurricane, and we can explain why there are forest fires, and we can explain a lot of different things, right? Going back not very long ago, people had no explanation for such things. As a result of that, people felt utterly disempowered, right? They couldn't go to a doctor and have a yearly checkup or have blood tests or scans. Nobody really knew what the year was going to bring. So people were grasping for ways to empower themselves. Hoshanah Rabbah and the beating of willow branches was exactly that idea. It was a way of trying to empower ourselves to engage with God, or get God to engage with us and give us rain. And we understood that the moral quality of our lives made a difference with how we lived on this earth and how the earth was going to sustain us. But to the ultimate questions of who will live and who will die and what kind of year are we going to have, those are embodied in the Utanatoka for a reason. Those are the issues that we all wonder about, right? What will happen? Who will die by fire and who by water and all the rest? How can I even know what the future holds? So look at this again and see that this is a way for people to be able to sort of look into the future and have some sense of what's coming, to be reassured or to be informed that they should get their lives in order. The fact is that this was more than just sort of an extreme view. The fact that a well-known rabbi put this into a woodcut means that there are lots of people that were doing this at that time to try and understand their fate. At the end of the day, we who know how to be good stewards of the world, who know how to create water, the fact is that the land of Israel, for the first time in its history, is water self-sufficient. Question now is, how can we take care of the world in such a way to ensure that it will be the source of good that it was in the story of creation? And with that, if you have questions, I'm happy to take them.
Rabbi,
Yes, please, Jay.
back in the 13th century, the life expectancy for someone was what, in their 30s?
I thought that was already pretty good.
So, right. So every year you would not know really if you would live or die.
Right.
Because your life expectancy was, so you get married at 13 and 12, whatever. And so wouldn't that be also something they would think about every year, because they knew a person who was 50 was old?
For sure. I think you're 100% right. I think you're 100% right. And by the way, this woodcut was done not all that long before the bubonic plague. So it's a really interesting issue as to how they were looking at their lives before that time and how they looked at their lives after. Other questions? I probably should have shown this at the beginning because this was not the most uplifting way to end.
I have a way I'd like to wrap it up, if you don't mind.
Please.
So
Clearly I'm not good at this. So
seeing Susan and Carolyn and Don and some people and Jane, some people who and Ken who participated in my little evenings where we said Psalm 27 every night together. This is the last night that we can say Psalm 27. We say it tomorrow morning and then we don't say it again. So I thought might be nice to end with saying Psalm 27 together. And I just want to point out one of the phrases in it that we, is often set to music is the Achat Sha'alti, the one thing I ask of Adonai. This is what I seek, to dwell in the house of God all the days of my life, to behold God's peacefulness and to pray in God's sanctuary, where that's what Hoshanah Rabah is about bringing us back to that sanctuary, bringing us back to dwell and reenacting those moments. As Rabbi Siegel said at the beginning, this is, probably the sort of most viscerally attached holiday we have to what happened in the sanctuary in terms of making those circles and holding the four species. It's, it's very grounding and an ancient culture to me. So if we can, feel free to, it's a little cacophonous, but feel free to unmute yourself if you want, and we can read this translation together. Of David, the Lord is my light and my help. Whom should I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Whom should I dread? When evil men assail me to devour my flesh, it is they, my foes and my enemies, who stumble and fall. Should an army besiege me, my heart would have no fear. Should war beset me, still would I be confident. One thing I ask of the Lord, only that do I seek, to live in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord, to frequent his temple. He will shelter me in his pavilion on an evil day. Grant me the protection of his tent. Raise me high upon a rock. Now is my head high over my enemies round about. I sacrifice in his tent with shouts of joy, singing and chanting a hymn to the Lord. Hear, O Lord, when I cry aloud. Have mercy on me, answer me. In your behalf, my heart says, seek my face. O Lord, I seek your face. Do not hide your face from me. Do not thrust aside your servant in anger. You have ever been my help. Do not forsake me. Do not abandon me, O God, my deliverer. Though my father and mother abandon me, the Lord will take me in. Show me your way, O Lord, and lead me on a level path because of my watchful foes. Do not subject me to the will of my foes, for false witnesses and unjust accusers have appeared against me. Had I not the assurance that I would enjoy the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living, look to the Lord. Be strong and of good courage. O look to the Lord.
Look to the Lord.
Kaveh el Adonai chazak v'yametz libecha v'kaveh el Adonai. I think that's important for us to tap into as we're heading into Hoshanah Rabah tomorrow morning, and feeling that vulnerability of our ancestors and praying for rain and knowing their dependency and wanting that courage to face the uncertain rainy season together as we face the uncertainty of the world right now together.
Well said. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for everything, as always.
Good. Well done.
Thank you all.
Very beautifully done.
Tomorrow, pick up your vote.
Yeah.
There's plenty.
Bye, everyone. Good night.
Have a good night, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Good night. Now we see you in the morning.
See you in the morning. There's plenty of Arava. We way over ordered.
Oh, well. I only took one package, but.
I know. I was thinking, God, I took 5 or 6. All right. Bye.
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 Amy, if you want to make me host, you can, and then I'll talk to my folks for a sec. Oh, and I think we can stop recording.
Okay.